Imagine a scenario of wickedness and depravity, where humans seek relations with angels and daughters become pregnant by their own fathers. Lot, a man whose choices place him at the epicenter of extraordinary events. Get ready to witness the judgment and wrath of God, culminating in the destruction of a civilization. Lot's initial accounts in the Bible are documented in the book of Genesis. Starting from chapter 11, his story begins with uncertainty surrounding the origin and meaning of his name. Some scholars suggest that it may represent the idea of a veil that covers, indicating the importance of presenting oneself well before others. According to the Bible, after his father's death, Lot left Ur of the Chaldeans and traveled to Haran, accompanied by his grandfather Terah, his uncle Abraham, and Sarai. When Abraham departed from Haran after Terah's death, Lot followed him to Canaan. During a severe famine in Canaan, Lot and Abraham journeyed to Egypt and settled there. However, after being deceived, the Pharaoh of Egypt expelled Abraham and Sarai, leading Lot to return with them to Canaan. During this period, both Abraham and Lot prospered significantly. Their herds grew so large that the land could no longer accommodate them both, leading to disputes among their shepherds. The contrast between Abraham and Lot in the biblical narrative is primarily revealed to the fundamental choices they make when faced with opportunities and challenges. Abraham is characterized by his obedience and trust in God's promises, which is reflected in how he leads his life. His faith directs his choices, making him a remarkable example of someone who places divine will above earthly interests. One day, Abraham was sitting at the entrance of his tent under the shade of the oaks of Mamre when suddenly he perceived the presence of 3 men standing before him. The tone of the account suggests that these visitors possess an extraordinary nature, as Abraham quickly prostrates himself in reverence before them. At that moment, he demonstrates remarkable hospitality, inviting them to stay and rest while offering water to wash their feet and food to restore their strength. During this encounter, Abraham and Sarah receive surprising and transformative news. One of the visitors reveals that in the same period the next year, Sarah, despite her old age, will have a child. This divine promise aligns with the previous one, in which God assured Abraham that his descendants would be as numerous as the stars in the sky. The account of the visit to Mamre not only showcases Abraham's exemplary hospitality, but also reveals the intimate and personal nature of the relationship between God and his faithful servant. On the other hand, Lot seemed increasingly influenced by the temptations of the material world and enticed by seemingly prosperous opportunities. For these reasons, Abraham and Lot decided to part ways. At the time of their separation, Abraham graciously allowed Lot to choose the land first. Abraham's decision to separate from Lot, aiming to preserve harmony and avoid conflicts, underscores the spiritual maturity of this patriarch. He values peace and union with God above material disputes. Lot chose the lush plains of the Jordan, towards the Dead Sea near Sodom. He was drawn by the beauty and fertility of the region, allowing himself to be influenced by purely material considerations. While understandable from a human perspective, this decision highlights Lot's vulnerability to the seductions of the world, in contrast to Abraham's spiritual steadfastness. After the separation, Lot settled in Sodom, where he quickly became involved in local affairs and seemed to achieve a prominent social position. However, the Bible describes the inhabitants of Sodom as extremely wicked, a situation that deeply distressed Lot. The Apostle Peter, in the New Testament, describes how Lot was tormented daily by the evil he witnessed in the city. While Lot was in Sodom, a battle unfolded in which kings from Mesopotamia defeated the cities of Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, Zeboim, and Zor. In this conflict, all the possessions of Sodom were plundered, and many inhabitants, including Lot, were captured. Informed of the events, Abraham organized a rescue force that, in a nighttime battle, defeated the enemy army and recovered Lot's belongings and his family. It was in this episode that Abraham encountered Melchizedek. Despite the war involving Sodom, Lot did not leave the city, and his story continues in the Bible. The narrative progresses with the visitation of angels to Sodom, which remained engulfed in chaos and perversion. The divine presence in the corrupt city underscores God's concern for human wickedness. This situation resonates with the message of Jeremiah 23, verse 24, emphasizing that God is attentive to the cry resulting from injustice. Divine intervention in human affairs reflects God's commitment to righteousness and his willingness to act in the face of evil. The Lord declares his intention to investigate the sins of Sodom, thus revealing his justice and rejection of iniquity. However, faced with such disappointment, God decides to destroy the city. The biblical narrative emphasizes the depravity of the inhabitants of Sodom, especially evident in how they treated the angels of the Lord. The men of Sodom, in their sinful conduct, desired to have sexual relations with the angels, a behavior that was a major reason for the city's destruction. During this turmoil, Lot tried to calm the situation in a controversial way by offering his daughters to the men of the city, an action that reflects his weakness and the harmful effects of the city on him. At this moment, the Bible delves into Abraham's courageous intercession before the Lord, revealing a genuine quest for divine understanding and justice. Abraham, aware of the imminent destruction of Sodom, dares to question God about the possibility of sparing the righteous along with the wicked. This audacious dialogue resonates with the exhortation in James 5, verse 16, which emphasizes that the prayer of a righteous person is powerful and effective. The narrative continues with a bold negotiation between Abraham and God, where Abraham dares to question the possibility of sparing the city for the sake of the righteous. Psalm 86, verse 15 reflects this context, proclaiming, "But you, Lord, are compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness." This reflection highlights God's willingness to hear the pleas of his servants and his readiness to act with compassion in response to fervent intercession. The story reveals not only God's compassion, but also the importance of persistence in seeking justice and mercy. When God decided to destroy the cities of the plain, including Sodom and Gomorrah, his judgment was final. The Bible recounts a significant event before the destruction of Sodom. Lot and his family were rescued by two angels sent by the Lord. This deliverance occurred thanks to divine mercy and God's commitment to the covenant established with Abraham. Faced with the insistence of the inhabitants of Sodom to capture the angels afflicted the men with blindness. They then commanded Lot to remove his entire family from the condemned city. Lot hesitated to leave Sodom, requiring the angels to forcibly lead him out. During the escape, the family was warned not to look back. However, Lot's wife disobeyed this order and was transformed into a pillar of salt, a dramatic representation of the consequences of disregarding God's guidance. Though spared from imminent destruction, Lot was not exempt from the moral consequences of his choices. His decision to dwell near Sodom exposed his family to a corrosive environment, and the story reveals a struggle to maintain moral integrity amid surrounding corruption. Lot's struggle resonates with contemporary challenges faced by Christians who often find themselves in societies permeated by values opposed to biblical teachings. After leaving Sodom, Lot and his two daughters moved to a small town. Fearing for their lives, they took refuge in a cave in a mountainous region, revealing a hesitation to fully trust in God's plan. This attitude contrasts with the unwavering trust Abraham demonstrated during his journey, even in the face of uncertainties and challenges. It was in this place that a terrible event occurred. Fearing for their safety, Lot's daughters were concerned about preserving the family's offspring. Feeling isolated and without the prospect of finding husbands, they devised a plan. At a certain point, Lot's daughters intoxicated their father and, motivated by a lack of understanding of moral and ethical norms, each of them lay with him on successive nights, seeking to generate offspring. From this incestuous union, Moab and Ben-Ammi were born, giving rise to the nations of the Moabites and Ammonites. These peoples caused various problems for the Israelites throughout biblical history. The narrative about Lot in the Bible continues, highlighting his complex and controversial relationship with his daughters after the events in Sodom. However, after this point, Lot's story remains without further details. It is unclear whether he managed to rebuild his life or ended his days in the cave where these events took place. It is important to note that the Apostle Peter mentions Lot in his second epistle, specifically in chapter 2, verses 7 and 8. This passage references the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. In the New Testament, Jesus also mentions Lot in the Gospel of Luke in an apocalyptic context, recalling the destruction of Sodom and Lot's salvation. This account serves as a reminder of the end times, emphasizing the importance of readiness and obedience to God. The biblical account shows that Lot had the opportunity to learn from Abraham, known as the father of faith. However, unlike his uncle, Lot did not follow faith, but rather his own perceptions and desires. This personal approach brought many afflictions and left deep scars on his family. Lot's story serves as an example of the consequences of choices guided more by personal visions than by faith and divine guidance. Valuable lessons for modern Christian life emerge from this account. The story of Sodom and Gomorrah highlights the importance of making ethical choices, even when facing cultural pressures. Paul, in his letter to the Romans, exhorts believers not to conform to the standard of this world, but to be transformed by the renewal of the mind. Romans 12, verse 2. This passage demonstrates the need for contemporary Christians to stand firm in their faith and moral values, regardless of external influences.